Once again, it's midweek manna time. I trust that you are prepared to get in for a good study and just get a big gulp of Hebrews. I know that some of you are just getting settled in, but we've still got a lot to cover tonight because we're still in chapter 11 of the book or the letter of Hebrews. And of course, we know when you hear Hebrews, most of us go right to chapter 11. But we've enjoyed the study. We'll be concluding here in a week or two of all the different positions that this writer took to just affirm and confirm who Jesus really is in our life. And again, not to be repetitive, but it just needs to be said each week. We see that this writer is defending the position from every angle, that Jesus is better than anything or anybody they'd ever personally known or had been passed down to them as a Hebrew nation. And to think about, to say somebody's better than the lawgiver or the great prophet Elijah was saying a lot, angels, and we've just gone through the list. And that's why chapter 11 is kind of a standalone chapter, because here we've been talking about the position that Jesus is better, he is superior to everything they had known. Why would they defect from the faith? And all of a sudden here now we're not talking about Jesus, we're talking about others who lived before Jesus had come to the earth. So why is this chapter here? Well, it's because it opens up the door for our understanding, where you and I still are, this thing called faith. And again, as we've shared, and we're going to continue to share, the faith doesn't create. Faith stands upon what is real. It affirms it, and I preached a couple weeks ago, I love the word, it reckons upon that which is. It says, no, I'm not going to accept anything else. I'm reckoning upon the truth. The truth will make us free. So we got through Abraham last week at verse 10. I do believe we're going to finish Hebrews 11 tonight. So with that being said, let's go right to verse 11 and 12 of chapter 11 of Hebrews. And now we're talking about Sarah. So again, I need to say this. We've just talked about Abraham, and now we're talking about, of course, his wife. And I'm so glad that it's written that way. This is the first woman that comes into the hall of faith here. And again, especially in the time that Abraham and Sarah would have lived, women just really didn't have any credence, didn't have position. And we see that the Word of God saw it different than the culture did at that time. So here's Sarah, and we just got a lot to say about her. By faith, Sarah herself received power to conceive, even when she was past the age, since she considered him faithful who had promised. Therefore, from one man, and him as good as dead, you go, Abraham, were born descendants, as many as the stars of heaven and as many as the innumerable grains of sand by the seashore. So here we're talking about faith, and we're seeing these examples of faith. And now we find Sarah. And we really could take all night and talk about Sarah, because even where I'd preached a couple weeks ago about Hagar and her role, and an incredible woman that she was and what she went through, here we find Sarah, who, again, the wording here, look again, verse 11, by faith Sarah herself received power to conceive. Well, she knew what it was to have relationship with her husband. They had tried and tried and tried and tried, not just years, decades. And now she hears this, what seemingly was an incredulous report, so much so that she laughed. And yet from there, by faith, she reckoned upon the promise and received power to actually conceive. Again, we could talk about her. I had a very spiritual experience a number of years ago about this church. And I was in the sanctuary praying, and all of a sudden the Lord took me through what a woman goes through with trimesters. And again, that was such a foreign thought to me. Men don't think that way. And so I knew that the Holy Spirit was dealing with me. And then I realized that he was really dealing about this church to me as the shepherd, as the pastor. And it took me through what Sarah, oh my goodness, had to go through, not only to believe. She knew she was past age. She knew her husband was beyond age. He was good as dead, as the Bible words it. And yet now she is pregnant, and she carries that child full term. But can you imagine, ladies especially, carrying a child when you're 90 years old? Can you imagine? Can you imagine the aches, the pains, the humiliations? Again, I could stay here all night long, but I've got to move on because these other. But again, I'm so thankful that Sarah is mentioned here, and again that she trusted God and had the ability to believe for that which was impossible by any other means. It was only faith, not faith in faith, faith in God and the report that she was given. And she stepped out on that and believed it, and therefore received her promise. Let's go on to verses 13 through 16. Now, everyone we've mentioned up till now, it culminates them for this first kind of a pause or a chorus, so to speak. It says, "These all died in faith, not having received the things promised, but having seen them and greeted them from afar, and having acknowledged that they were strangers and exiles on the earth. For people who speak thus make it clear that they are seeking a homeland. If they had been thinking of that land from which they had gone out, they would have had opportunity to return. But as it is, they desire a better country, that is, a heavenly one. Therefore," got two therefores in there, "God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he had prepared for them a city." You know, as we watch the news today, as we talk about the border of the United States, the southern border, we know it's a political hot potato today. That's not where I'm going. However, you take the numbers, whatever they are, of these individuals coming out of Honduras especially and other countries. We know some have migrated out of Europe, made their way into South America, and making their way up. I know what I'm saying is volatile here. But let's take the politics out for just a moment and look at the reality of these migrants, these individuals that are leaving what they've known. Why? Because they're seeking a better country. That takes us right back to what these individuals were experiencing. Many of the Hebrew nation knew what it was to be exiled in Babylon, in Egypt, and here they had been promised a better country, a better land, the promised land. However, you notice the wording there. They now had got their sights on something even better than what they could ever experience upon the earth. And that is a heavenly country, one that God was building. Again, we take the time to look at this, and we've got to take a moment here because it's in this hall of faith. It takes all these that we've read about thus far, and it says they didn't receive their promise, but by faith they were believing for something better. That is speaking to us, because you and I might not be at the southern border of the United States today, seeking a better country. At the same time, we are likened unto them because as these individuals were called sojourners, they were called aliens. In other words, at best, they had visas, but they were not citizens of where they were residing. You and I are the same way. Yes, we're born in this country. Some I know are outside this country right now and watching and listening. But for those of us that have been born in the United States and have U.S. citizenship as a result of being birthed here, we still realize spiritually we're still seeking a better country, a better land. Yes, we can get very comfortable here. Even though things may be getting uncomfortable, we're still so blessed and we know it. So this is why it should speak to us tonight. Again, we could camp out here on this part to again make sure we're not getting so comfortable that we're not still seeking a better country. That's why the Bible took time. This writer took time. This is why this writer was inspired of the Holy Spirit to write those words so that you and I would still be talking about it in 2021. To, of course, realize this is not home for us. We're just passing through. Let's keep going on because we've got to watch our time. Verses 17 through 19. By faith, Abraham, when he was tested, he offered up Isaac. We already shared that part, but it's kind of recapping. And then it goes on. And he who had received the promises was in the act of offering up his only son, of whom it is said, through Isaac shall your offspring be named. He considered that God was able even to raise him from the dead, from which, figuratively speaking, he did receive him back. Again, here I am in the studio tonight. I have one child, a son. You know him, Aaron. He's in the studio with me. I cannot imagine the emotions that this man by the name of Abraham is directed by God to take that boy's life. Again, I am convinced that Isaac was not a child. I believe he was a full-grown young man at the time that he would lie upon an altar. We know that God is the giver of life and has never condoned human sacrifice. And yet, he's asking Abraham to offer up his son. And by faith, Abraham prepares to do that. You just can't get your mind wrapped around it. Because you and I know how the story ended. And we're relaxed, but Abraham didn't know. And that's why the Bible took time to tell us, okay, if I take his life, this God who gave him life the first time will give him life again. He believed in a resurrection right there. Abraham didn't have a clue that he was becoming a living billboard, an example of what God would offer us through his own begotten Son, Jesus. That's why this passage is in here. Jesus is better. And we're realizing now all these that are examples of faith, this one is a standout of all them. That Abraham, the Bible takes the time also to say that Abraham was thinking, but this is the son of promise. Now you got to realize, Abraham had another son, Ishmael, who was 13 years old by that time. Let me rephrase that, 13 years older than Isaac, the son of promise. But he doesn't say, okay, if I lose one, I still got the other one. I'll go back. No. He knew that Isaac was the son of promise. And so again, we see in this passage here something that's just glaring at us. That we, before we move on, we gotta ask ourselves, am I willing to sacrifice the thing that I love most dearly? Do I have the faith that it takes to make that kind of sacrifice? Again, God was inspiring this whole event so that you and I would talk about and have a human example. Again, we could talk about Abraham forever. We could talk about Sarah forever. We could talk about Isaac forever. All of these are speaking to us about our life now. And we're going to see right at the end of this chapter where you and I play in. So I don't want to take away from that right now. So let's move on and read verses 20 through 22. By faith, then, Isaac invoked future blessings on Jacob and Esau. Verse 21, by faith, Jacob, when dying, blessed each of the sons of Joseph, bowing in worship over the head of his staff. In verse 22, by faith, then, Joseph, at the end of his life, made mention of the exodus of the Israelites and gave directions concerning his bones. What we've just read there are the patriarchs of the Hebrew nation. Right there we see the Mount Rushmore of this nation. We see Abraham. Can't you see his head chiseled out of the mountainside there? Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. All of them mentioned here, again, now as a grouping, we've got individual pictures of them, and now we see this group shot. And it's speaking to them of, by faith, they spoke blessing, invoked blessing upon their descendants. And again, we got to remember something here. You got to remember this. This is all BC. This is all before Christ. This is all before Jesus. And again, we got to see the parallel now. You and I are on the other side of the cross of Calvary, the sacrifice. That's why Jesus is the better sacrifice. So again, as we see these, they bless their descendants again by faith. I mean, they didn't have the privilege you and I have today of commentaries and sermon outlines and volumes of books written. No, they were walking through this thing, had limited knowledge of God compared to what we have today, and yet by faith they believed. Oh my, let's keep moving. Verses 23 through 29. By faith, Moses, when he was born, was hidden for 3 months by his parents. So already we're seeing the faith of those parents of Moses. Moses had no decision in this. He was an infant. So we see the whole picture here, the complete story. So again, verse 23, by faith Moses, when he was born, was hidden for 3 months by his parents, because they saw that the child was beautiful. And they were not afraid of the king's edict. By faith, then, Moses, when he was grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. Oh my goodness. And I love the next verse. Choosing rather to be mistreated with the people of God than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. Got to read that again. As a full-grown man, choosing rather to be mistreated. Who in their right mind would do that? Would rather be mistreated with the people of God than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. He considered the reproach of Christ greater. Notice again, this is all BC, but look at the wording of chapter 11 here. He considered the reproach of Christ greater wealth than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking to the reward. By faith, he left Egypt, not being afraid of the anger of the king. For he endured as seeing him who is invisible. So by faith he kept the Passover and sprinkled the blood so that the destroyer of the firstborn might not touch them. By faith, the people crossed the Red Sea as on dry land, but the Egyptians, when they had attempted to do the same, were drowned. Oh my. So again, here's this hall of faith. We've already had the individual portrait of Moses, and now we're coming back to it again and seeing the complete story. The faith of his parents that was instilled in him. And now when he was of age, oh my, what a decision. Now, again, this is what movies are made out of. There have been plenty of movies about Moses, not just the Ten Commandments. And knowing that he was so blessed materially, he was blessed in every way. And yet, he chose his native people over now a people that he had been accepted by. Knowing that there was no comparison, absolutely no comparison in the wealth of the stature, the prestige, the future. That's got to speak to us today. This thing called faith, it has been so beat up and so abused. Again, remember what we've read thus far in this chapter alone. All these had not received their promise, but by faith they believed for something better. In other words, in their lifetime upon the earth, they weren't going to see the complete promise. That also speaks to us. We cannot lose sight. So remember now, we're talking about the whole letter of Hebrews, and we've talked about the peril of drifting. And again, the intent of this letter was to speak to these who had tasted something better. They had tasted what Jesus was offering, what he represented, who he is. And yet, because of the passage of time, of their opinion of how long he should be away before he returned, they were starting to drift back. What about us? Do we find ourselves being allured by the world, the pleasure of sin, of, oh, well, things are kind of getting tense. I better get something, that's substantial that I can get my hands on, something I can work for. All of these had made tremendous sacrifice. Here's Moses. Again, he had the wealth, the absolute greatest wealth of the planet at that time. And he walked away from it. He walked away from it. Went into the wilderness. He had no idea what was out there for him. We know the rest of the story. And then, can you believe it? Insult to injury. God says, I want you to go back. Oh my goodness. I trust that these stories of antiquity are speaking to us again. That's why they're here. That's why they're still inspired. They're speaking to us right now of our journey. We find ourselves ebbing and flowing. We find ourselves being on the mountain, and then all of a sudden the mountain evaporates and we're down in the valley. We know Paul's words later, to be content whatever state that we're in. I know what it is to abound. I also know what it is to be abased. I know what it is to be popular. I know what it is to be rejected. We've got to hold fast the same kind of faith that reckons upon what God has promised. At times, we've believed for things materially or some time schedule or some kind of promotion, and we've received those things, and we're blessed, and we give God the glory and give him the credit for it. But how do we do when those things then are removed from us? Do we find ourselves feeling sorry for ourselves? Do we find ourselves saying, yes, it doesn't work anymore? Or do we have this kind of faith? That's why it's here. That's why these examples of faith are here. So again, we see this whole story of Moses, and we see that he believed in the word, and he sprinkled the blood on the doorpost. And I don't know if you've ever kind of paid attention to that, but you can even see the form of the cross with that blood, because they would have made a motion upward with one doorpost and then the lintel, and then go back down the other doorpost. You can see the cross. Way before Jesus would give his life on a cross, we see even way back then, Moses believed that the destroyer could be stopped with the blood, that the death angel would pass by them. And they survived. Not only did they survive the plagues that had come upon Egypt while they were sojourners in that land, but then, of course, once again, the Red Sea story is mentioned again here in this chapter. Verses 30 and 31. I know we're taking a lot on in just 30 minutes of time here, but you have the privilege of going back and reading for yourself again. Just camp out on even one section that the way we've done it. It'll bless you. But again, verse 30, by faith the walls of Jericho fell down after they had been encircled for 7 days. And right here, captured together, then we talk about Rahab, verse 31. By faith Rahab the prostitute did not perish with those who were disobedient, because she had given a friendly welcome to the spies. Again, the whole story of Jericho is mind-boggling to any of us that understand construction, that understands warfare. The weaponry, the disadvantages. I mean, here you got people that had wandered in a wilderness for an entire generation, some 40 to 45 years. And now they're moving in to the promised land. I mean, they're just getting in. And here's this fortified structure. You remember the story. If not, please go back and read it for yourself. Carmen, the Christian entertainer, just passed away a week or so ago, but he was the one that, for many of you that were students in youth ministries, in the 80s, Carmen became this big icon, and he did a wonderful job bringing this story out, reminding us that the walls of Jericho were so incredible that they had chariot races on the tops of those walls. And then for them just to fall down because some people were shouting, my goodness, trumpets blaring. And it took faith. Again, we put ourselves in the position of those people. He said to do what? Do what to make those walls? Are you kidding me? We need some bazookas. We need some tanks. We need something. We need a nuclear bomb. We need something. You're asking us to do what? Day in and day. What? Again, let these stories come alive again. Because the whole thing's about faith. Not faith creating something. Faith reckoning upon the promises of God. By faith, those walls, their obedience to that promise, those walls came down. And then here's a second woman mentioned in this hall of faith. And she's a prostitute. Oops, how'd she get in there? And yet, it was her obedience. Of course, she became part of the lineage of King David. So there's hope for all of us, folks, right? God's looking for that faith. Faith in God. Faith in His promises. Let's move on. Verses 32 through 34. And what more shall I say? So I've preached enough sermons in my life. You probably don't get tickled with that, but I love the way it's worded. And what shall I say? So in other words, it's, you're preaching a great message or you feel like it's coming across well, and all of a sudden you look up on the wall and you look at the clock. It's like, oh my goodness, I got to wind this sermon up and I got so much more on my outline. I hope some other teachers and preachers out there feeling it with me. That's exactly what this writer's saying. Verse 32 again, and what more shall I say? For time would fail me to tell of Gideon, the story of the 300, of course, Barak, him and Deborah, of course, fighting 900 chariots. Samson took on the Philistine nation by himself. Jephthah, of course, taking on the Ammonites, and of David and of Samuel and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, enforced justice, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions. Speaking of Daniel, of course. Verse 34, quenched the power of fire, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, escaped of the edge of the sword, were made strong out of weakness, became mighty in war, put foreign armies to flight. So again, we see all these individuals. Sheila and I had the privilege there in Israel to be right there at the place that Gideon had to keep diminishing the numbers and got down to the 300. And I was asked to speak at that particular place by our guide. And again, the difference of just getting down and drinking water, and the others who were wise enough just to cup their hand and still be able to look while they were drinking. And those 300 would leave that place into their destiny. So again, we just read this section now that was referencing, and I threw those names out because you knew them as well, these incredible stories that we love to share, especially Children's Church and Miss Sheila and Harry and all the different ones, of course, that the fiery furnace and the lion's den. Yes, by faith, they were able to subdue kingdoms, became mighty in battle. I mean, David alone, not only, I don't want to sound like I'm diminishing Goliath, but he became such a warrior, the shepherd boy. And again, notice how he was worded in here earlier, just almost like we just barely mentioned David's name. It's because, why? David was the least of his brothers. He wasn't even brought in to be surveyed. Samuel said, you got any more? What? Well, yeah, I got the runt outside. Maybe you identify with that. Again, all of these won some incredible, amazing victories. Now, you can feel it, can't you? We're setting ourselves up for the rest of the reading here. But let's enjoy the moment because it's speaking of us. We have the highs and we also have the lows. At times, it's like, my goodness, can God bless me fast enough? Can God use me in any more humbling way than this? This is incredible what I just witnessed. To have favor with somebody, to accomplish something that God put in your heart, and all of a sudden it's becoming reality. Oh my goodness. But the scriptures didn't leave us there alone, did it? No. Verses 35 through 40 finishes up chapter 11. Women received back their dead by resurrection. Still has that high. And all of a sudden, some were tortured, refusing to accept release so that they might rise again to a better life. Others suffered mocking and flogging, and even chains and imprisonment. They were stoned. They were sawn in two. They were killed with the sword. They went about in skins of sheep and goats, destitute, afflicted, mistreated. I love verse 38. Get ready for a big gulp, will you? No finer wording than this. Of whom the world was not worthy. Wandering about in deserts and mountains and in dens and caves of the earth. And all of these, though commended through their faith, did not receive what was promised. Oh my goodness, I just thought we took that pause earlier, and now here we are saying the same thing of all of them. Since God, I told you we'd get back to us, since God had provided something better for us, moi, us, that apart from us, they should not be made perfect. Wow. So you see, we're actually in the Hall of Faith. You ever think of that? Sometimes we read these stories of old, crossing of the Red Sea, the lion's den, the fiery furnace, the battlefields, back to David with Goliath. Sheila and I were privileged to get to the Valley of Elah. No, wait a minute. That was the second trip I went on. Sheila was not there. And the Valley of Elah, in our minds, we think of these two armies and Goliath coming out just mocking the God of Israel day after day. You'd think it had to be a huge theater of operation, a big battlefield. I'm telling you, the property on the back of this church is about the size of it. And you could see the wet weather stream that was right there at the bottom of that valley. When old Big Boy came out of that army over there, his voice had to have boomed forever because it wasn't that far. How daunting it must have been. And here little David comes out there with a sling and 5 stones. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. See, these stories got to come to life to us. They got to speak to us. Jesus is better. Jesus is better. Jesus is superior. Everything they had known nationally had to realize just we're setting the stage for the one that was superior. What about us? We're on the other side, and we're mentioned right here. Apart from us, you see, we're on the other side of Calvary. Do we have faith? Can we trust God for the impossible? Will we take God at His word? Will we stand upon the commandments? Will we stand upon the promises? Will we believe God for something that we have not obtained? And here's the one that will kind of kick us inside the head. Do we trust enough? Do we believe enough? Do we hope enough? Do we care enough to say, okay, God, I'm going to live this thing, even if I don't get to see it in my lifetime? Man, that isn't preached near enough. Because we are so used to getting what we want as soon as we go through the drive-thru. We want gratification immediately. All of these, again, look at the wording here. All these, though commended through their faith, again, subduing kingdoms, bringing their children back from the dead, all these things, they, even though they were commended for their faith, they did not receive what was promised, since God had provided something better for us. What is that something better? Jesus. His life upon the earth, His passion, His suffering, His death, His resurrection. And apart from us, they should not be made perfect. I guess we're kind of with Charles Dickens now. The best of times and the worst of times. Let's not lose focus in this hour. Let's not lose focus of the faith that's been portrayed here And that same faith that we've got to have right now as we are pilgrims and sojourners and aliens passing through. Let's make a difference as we're passing through. Can I pray with you? We thank you for this incredible letter, so inspired, that is speaking to us again. Let it resonate with our soul. Whatever you've called upon us to do in this hour as Grace Life Church, corporately, and then others that are watching or will watch that may not be a part of this particular congregation or just individually, Lord. Let us realize that you've given us this faith, the measure of faith. What are we going to do with it? Are we going to take you at your word, Lord? Are we going to take you at your word and stand upon your promises? Maybe we'll also come back, Lord, though, as what Job said, you may slay me, but I'm still going to serve you. Lord, let us not get sidetracked with the circumstances of the hour. We have to pay attention to them, but we can't make it our focus. We're looking unto you, Jesus, the author, the finisher, the perfecter of our faith. It's in Jesus' name we pray. God bless you. I hope you've enjoyed tonight. I trust that you'll take all of the letter of Hebrews, the book of Hebrews, but especially chapter 11. Why don't you just take some time this next week until we get together again and just make it your devotion time. Let it speak to you again, okay? God bless you.